From MTN News, this is the race for Montana governor.
Hello and welcome to Debate Month and Debate Central here on the Montana Television Network. If you're keeping track at home, the 2020 election is now just 31 days away, basically 1 month to go. This coming Friday on the 9th of October, the ballots get mailed out to all the registered voters in Montana. In fact, several counties started their early voting yesterday. Now today, our focus on the Montana Television Network is the race for Montana governor. Now, a few details on the rules today, just some simple rules. The candidate that is being questioned will have 60 seconds to respond. Then the other candidate will have a 30-second rebuttal, and the candidate that was questioned first has a 30-second reply to wrap up that question. And we're asking our candidates to please stay within the time constraints. That way we can get in as many questions as possible. At stake, of course, in this race is Montana's governor's chair. The salary of Montana's governor is $115,505. That, by the way, ranks 42nd among the U.S. governor's salaries. Let's meet the candidates.
Greg Gianforte founded Right Now Technologies, a software development firm 2 decades ago with his wife Susan in their Bozeman home. It grew into the town's largest commercial employer, created over 500 high-paying Montana jobs, and helped launch the high-tech sector in Montana. Mr. Gianforte was elected as Montana's sole U.S. House member in 2017 and re-elected the next year. He also ran for governor in 2016, losing to incumbent Democrat Governor Steve Bullock. Greg and his wife have 4 children and 1 grandson. Mike Cooney is the current lieutenant governor of Montana, elected with Governor Bullock in 2016. He is a 4th-generation Montanan who grew up in Butte, where his parents ran a food brokerage company. Mr. Cooney has dedicated his life to public service, including terms as Montana's Secretary of State and as a state senator from Helena. He also has worked as a director of a group promoting maternal and child health in Montana. He and his wife Deanne have 3 children and 1 grandchild.
Time now to meet our MTN debate team. Posing the questions of our candidates today, let's welcome in Jill Valley from KPAX TV, anchor and reporter at that facility. Mike Dennison, our chief political reporter at the Montana Television Network. And I'm Jay Cohn, anchor emeritus here at KTVQ in Billings. Now, prior to today's debate, there was a drawing held to determine which of our candidates will go first. And Mr. Cooney, that honor goes to you. And as moderator, I get to ask the first question. And our first question today, gentlemen, is about the pandemic. Montana is seeing a resurgence in COVID-19 cases. We seem to be setting a new record every day today. In fact, the first time Montana has seen over 500 new cases. Mr. Cooney, you're a member of the Bullock administration. How do you rate the administration's response to this pandemic? And if you become governor, what are some of the first things you will do to help Montana recover from and get through this pandemic?
Well, thanks very much for the question, Jay. Thank you, MTN, for hosting this debate. You know, obviously this pandemic is our #1 priority. You know, when Washington punted this to the states some time ago, Governor Bullock and I sat down and immediately started working to make sure that Montanans had access to the PPE and the materials we needed to keep the testing going so we could try to stay ahead of the pandemic. You know, what we've seen is a pretty good record so far. I mean, even though we still have a number of people being infected, we still have one of the lowest rates of infection. You know, we have our unemployment is one of the best in the state or in the country compared to any other state in the nation. You know, we have a lot of work still to do. We know we've got to whip this virus. We need to continue to get people back to work. We need to continue to use science and the best medical practices. We know that's what will work when it comes to whipping this virus. And that's what I'm going to do as governor. We're going to continue to use science, the best medical practices, and get Montanans to go along with this.
Mr. Gianforte, you have 30 seconds for your rebuttal.
Well, also thank you to MTN, and it's a pleasure to be with you. We face serious challenges that require serious solutions. People around the state want leadership, not partisanship. So that's why this evening, my commitment to you is I will talk about serious solutions and emphasize the need for leadership and avoid petty partisanship. I think we're just really tired of it. I published a comeback plan. I think my priority for COVID has got to be to keep people safe. but I would rely more on personal responsibility as we move forward.
Mr. Cooney, you have your final 30 seconds.
Personal responsibility in Montana is Montanans looking out for each of us, and that's what we need to do. I will also say that we need to follow science. We need to follow the best medical practices. What we don't need is someone who doesn't believe in science, someone who thinks that herd immunity is the best way to attack this virus. Herd immunity could cost up to 10,000 Montana lives. The other thing is cutting healthcare in the middle of a pandemic, which my opponent has done as a congressman. That is just the wrong approach during a pandemic.
All right, thank you. This next question is for Mr. Gianforte, and let's dig into the pandemic just a little bit more. A lot of Montanans are very frustrated with this mask mandate, and they don't want to wear one. They're upset that they can't go to their child's sporting events because of the limits on size. If you were governor, assuming this is still going on when you'd be inaugurated, would you be in favor of lifting any of those? And if it gets bad, would you support another stay-at-home order like we saw back in March?
So thanks for your question. As I've traveled the state, Montanans are hurting. They're concerned about their health. And we need to have public policy that keeps the most vulnerable safe. Our frontline healthcare workers have been doing a tremendous job. But we do need to get our schools back open again. The American Pediatrics Association has said it's unhealthy for kids to stay home. So I think there's more we could do, and we can't neglect the fact that the actions that have been taken have resulted in 150,000 Montanans losing their jobs. Montanans want to get back to work. I think we can do it with effective policy that allows people to protect the people on the front line, but also gets people back to work.
Mr. Cooney, you have 30 seconds.
What we know, especially since yesterday when the president and first lady were diagnosed with COVID, and I wish them the speediest and quickest recovery, we know that this virus knows no limits. We need to remain vigilant. We know that science says that wearing masks, avoiding large crowds, properly handling hygiene is going to be the best weapon. We need to have healthy citizens if we're going to have a healthy economy. That's going to be my focus. People being healthy, people going back to work.
Mr. Gianforte, 30 seconds.
Well, I would just say that this has been an unprecedented time. And again, people are hurting. We have a health crisis. We also have an economic crisis. But even before the economic crisis that came on us from COVID, Montana was 44th in the nation in wages. And unfortunately, too many of our kids and grandkids have to leave. I have a comeback plan. I'll use my business experience to get folks back to work, and I encourage people to take a look. It's out at montanabusinessplan.com.
Mr. Cooney, let's talk a little bit about your resume. By the way, thanks for being here. Good evening. You've been holding public office or working for the government for a lot of the past 45 years. Mr. Gianforte has spent his career in mostly developing software businesses. So how does your resume convince voters that you're the better choice compared to his?
Well, Mike, I bring a record of results to the people of Montana. Let's just look at it. Under our leadership, we've expanded access to more than 250,000 more acres of public lands. We've expanded access to 90,000, access to healthcare to 90,000 Montanans. And we have fostered an economy strong enough to weather this COVID crisis. There's a lot of more work that needs to be done. We need to whip this virus. We need to get people back to work. But we also need to make sure that we continue to work to drive down the cost of healthcare and prescription drugs. Montanans want a quality public pre-K system, and we need to continue to do, make investment in education to prepare our kids for the jobs of tomorrow. Mr. Gianforte moved here from New Jersey. He sued the people to block access to the East Gallatin River. He's been, as a congressman, trying to cut healthcare to Montanans, those 90,000 Montanans. And he grew a business, basically, and wealth, basically outsourcing American jobs. Bottom line is, the choice is so clear.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney. Mr. Gianforte, your response.
Well, again, I promise not to be partisan here. Mike Cooney's trying to mislead you about these issues. Here's the facts. We're 44th in the nation in wages. Our kids are leaving. We're last in the country in starting teacher pay. 150,000 Montanans have lost their job. And tragically, we have the second highest number of kids in foster care per capita, and we're in the top 3 for suicide. And yet, I've rolled out a comeback plan to get Montana back on its feet and back to work. My opponent, as recently as July, said, we're doing so great, we don't need a comeback plan. I think that's what you get from an out-of-touch career politician.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney, your response.
You know, leading the state takes a lot of hard work, and I've shown up every day that I've served the people of Montana. You know, I've worked with Republicans and Democrats to bring the results I just talked about. My opponent went to Congress. He's missed more votes than 93% of his colleagues. You know, he's even voted on bills to increase the federal deficit, which our kids and all our kids are going to have to pay for in the future. Again, takes hard work and showing up. Mr. Gianforte doesn't even show up at his current job as congressman for Montana.
Mr. Gianforte, you get the next first shot at this. Our topic now, we touched a little bit already on healthcare, but you've said you support keeping Medicaid expansion in Montana, protection, and also protection for those with pre-existing conditions, at least protection on their health insurance coverage. Yet at the same time, you still state you want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which is the federal law that brought both of those things to us. How is that not a contradiction?
Well, thank you, Jay. I want to address the comment that Mike Cooney made about missing votes. I was invited by Vice President Pence to come and work on the meth issue here in Montana. And the vast majority of the votes I missed in Congress were because I chose to accompany him on Air Force 2 to Montana to work on the meth problem. And given that choice again, I'd do it in a second. You're right, I support Medicaid expansion. We need a safety net for folks that can't take care of themselves. I do think we need to bring some additional accountability to it. As I talk to people around Montana, the big issue with healthcare is really that the Affordable Care Act has done anything but make it affordable. Costs are through the roof. That's why I've been such a strong proponent in Congress, introducing or co-sponsoring almost 24 bills to get the cost of prescription drug prices down, to increase supply, and to protect people with pre-existing conditions. I'm proud of the record of my service on the healthcare subcommittee, and I'll bring those principles to Helena when I'm your next governor.
Mr. Cooney, your rebuttal.
You know, Congressman, we pay you to be our congressman, to be our one voice in Congress, so you should show up. And when you show up, you vote to cut the ACA, which would throw Montanans, 90,000 Montanans, off healthcare in Montana. It would take people with pre-existing conditions and throw them off healthcare. They wouldn't be able to get coverage. And then it would put our rural hospital system on life support. We know that Medicaid expansion has been a lifeline for our rural healthcare system. You know, we need a governor that's going to provide leadership and protect those things.
Mr. Gianforte, the final 30 seconds here.
Well, on Mike's watch, we've seen violent crime go up 36% across the state because there's been a hesitancy to back our men and women in blue. When one municipality tried to establish sanctuary cities, Mike did nothing. When local communities tried to violate our Second Amendment, he stood by and did nothing. And yet we're second highest in the country in suicide, more kids than every other state except one in foster care. We need a leader in Helena that's going to tackle this meth epidemic and get people in communities healthy.
Well, that actually ties into my next question, which goes to Mr. Cooney. In recent years, we do have an increase in drug-related crime, and we got a lot of neglected children in our state system. I actually contacted DPHHS yesterday and got a count. There are 3,485 children in foster care right now in Montana. Not all because of drugs, but a lot of it is a factor in that. What have you done and what will you do, if elected governor, to address this problem that's really stressing a lot of systems and, of course, is really quite sad?
Well, I mean, obviously, this is a big problem. And I have to say that, you know, you mentioned meth, you mentioned other issues. Let me just say, the first thing we need to do is we need to protect Medicaid expansion. Because under Medicaid expansion, 90,000 Montanans now have access to mental health care, addiction services. And those are very important. We strip those services away from the people of Montana. We will only see these other problems get bigger. As a state, you know, we have been focusing very hard on trying to address the issues that you just talked about. We need to continue to do it. We're making progress. It's not fast enough, but we need to continue to move Montana forward. We need to make sure that we're using the best policies and the best practices, looking at what other states are doing to address these issues. That's what we need to do in the next administration, to make sure that we're giving our kids the best life. And we need to be continuing to invest in our public education system so that when they go to school, they're prepared to come out to be successful. And a pre-K program would be a great start to that.
Thank you. Mr. Gianforte, you have 30 seconds.
Well, this situation is tragic, with the second highest number of kids in foster care per capita in the entire country. These are little kids without a mom or without a dad. And as I visit with folks around the state, it's primarily because of the meth issue. We have a plan. It's in our comeback plan. We need to have increased focus on rehabilitation for nonviolent people that are addicted to substances so they can live fulfilling lives and be the moms and dads they need to be. We have them in some counties, but not all. We'll make that happen when I'm your next governor.
All right, final 30 seconds to you, Mr. Cooney.
Well, I think Mr. Gianforte said it well. It's an issue of addiction and so forth. Again, we cannot lose Medicaid expansion and throw those people off those services. We also cannot be removing people from healthcare in the middle of this problem. This is one of the core values. We've got to get to the root of these problems. Healthcare, mental health services, addiction services, that will be the key to addressing this at the root level.
Thank you.
Mr. Gianforte, let's talk about legalization of marijuana. Of course, you are opposing the ballot measures on the ballot this year to legalize marijuana for recreational use in Montana. But voters have been passing these. They've been on the ballot in the past. I'm just wondering, if they do pass, how are you as governor going to implement this proposal or handle this proposal?
Okay, thanks, Mike. And you're right, it's going to be on the ballot. The people of Montana get to make that choice. I will respect the will of the people. We don't know the outcome yet, so it's a little bit of a hypothetical, but I would work with the legislature to adopt appropriate regulations. There need to be some regulations in place, just like we have regulations for drunk driving and other substances that people use. So I think there are prudent steps, and we have to look at the lessons in other states. As a business guy, you learn that there's very few new things under the sun. You can look in other places and take lessons from that. And so that's really my answer to that. I want to touch on one other thing that I think I bring to this office, and that is really the bipartisan work I did in Congress. My wife and I rented a little apartment on Capitol Hill, and I cook for other members of Congress. I have Democrats and Republicans over every week. I think when you break bread together, you can find common ground. And I think Montanans share more in common than separates us. I'm going to turn the governor's residence into a house of hospitality to bring people together.
Thank you. Mike Cooney, your rebuttal, and let's talk a little bit about your position on the marijuana initiatives and what you would do as governor to take care of that.
Sure. Well, as you stated in the question, this is happening in states all around us. And we see even more states in this particular election season addressing the same issue. If this passes in Montana, we need to be prepared to make sure that we're looking out for the safety of our citizens. We need to make sure that the products that are being sold are safe. They're staying out of the hands of the wrong people that should not be the kids. We need to make sure that law enforcement has the tools that they're going to need. As governor, I'll bring Republicans and Democrats, law enforcement, and people from local communities together to help to give us the guidance on getting this done.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney. Mr. Gianforte, 30 seconds to respond if you wish.
Just to follow on my point of bipartisanship, one of the members of Congress I had to my apartment was Joe Kennedy, which is probably one of the most liberal members. I'm in a workout group with him. I know for a fact that I served him his first moose steak. And Joe and I don't agree on a whole lot of policy, but it doesn't mean we can't be friends. I've also worked with Anna Eshoo, the chairwoman of the healthcare subcommittee, to get a really groundbreaking telemedicine legislation passed. And recently I was able to call in a favor from, again, a Democrat in Congress who I dug out of a snow ditch in Bozeman to get funding for the St. Mary's project. Those are examples of bipartisan work, and I would bring that leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Gianforte. You're running out of time. Let's move on to higher education. Mr. Cooney, the next question goes to you. I think it's no secret it's becoming increasingly expensive for Montanans to attend state universities. If you're the governor, what will you do to address that? And specifically, how would you pay for that?
Well, Mike, again, let me just say about education in Montana. It is the backbone of our economy. We have to make sure that we're properly funding our K-12 program, preparing our kids to go into whatever the area of interest they choose to go into. If they decide they want to go to a 2-year college, we need to continue to make sure that we're providing those educational opportunities that will help prepare them for those jobs of tomorrow. The same thing with our 4-year colleges. You know, I've talked about the fact that we need to continue to freeze our tuitions at our colleges. We need to make sure we're doing everything to keep college tuitions affordable for Montanans. But we also have to be looking at other options for training our future workforce. Things like apprenticeship program, things like certificate programs that we can offer. We need to be talking to businesses throughout the state, listening to what their needs and desires are going to be for the future. We can be a partner with them. We're not going to create those jobs, but we can be a partner in making sure that those entrepreneurs and those business people are successful and continue to be successful throughout the state of Montana.
Mr. Gianforte, your answer.
Well, I do think, I agree with Mike on this. I think we need increased focus on the trades. That's why my wife and I have provided over 1,500 scholarships for veterans and low-income Montanans to get certificates in welding, machining, carpentry, plumbing. We need to build stuff. I think also, when I was running our business in Bozeman, we developed public-private partnerships to help bring the marketplace closer to secondary education so we get better outcomes. No parent sends their kids to a 4-year college hoping that they'll get out and not be able to get a job with a lot of debt. We can do better.
Mr. Cooney, you have the final word on this question.
You know, again, I just outlined my support and how I've championed public education throughout my career. My opponent called public education a monopoly. He also believes that taking money from public education and putting it into private education is an okay thing to do. I don't believe that that's the way we invest in our public education and give our kids the chance that they need. My opponent also supports a school in Bozeman that discriminates against kids with disabilities. You know, education should be the great equalizer. That's not the great equalizer.
Thank you. This next question goes to Mr. Gianforte, and it kind of came from some comments we saw on Facebook from some frustrated Montanans. You know, our average income in this state, $50,000 to $60,000 a year for some, but the average cost of a house in Missoula, $350,000. In Bozeman, I think it's pushing $500,000. Housing costs are just so very high. If you were governor, is there anything you could do to help more people actually afford a house and afford to live in this state?
Yes, and quickly, just to address Mike's last point, I mean, I am a strong supporter of public education. We need to get more. You know, today, under Mike's watch, we have the lowest starter teaching pay in the entire country. And honestly, that causes very difficult situations for local schools to get the people hired. I want to get more money to the classroom so our public school teachers can make more. And I'm sorry, Jill, please repeat the question if you would.
Oh, just housing is so expensive in Montana. Montanans don't have a lot of money to afford $500,000 homes. They're frustrated. Anything you can do to help make it happen for them?
Yes, so I think there's two things. One is we've got to get our economy going. We have the 44th lowest wages in the country. My whole plan is about creating more good paying jobs. On the state side, we've got to change leadership at DEQ and DNRC and streamline our permitting. One of the things we've committed to is a top to bottom regulatory review on every state agency to remove excessive regulations. We need regulations for public safety and to protect the environment, but it's hard to get a building permit.
Mr. Cooney, 30 seconds, any thoughts on housing affordability?
Yeah, I thought that's what your question was about the cost of housing. And let me just say that I've talked about the possibility of looking at the state setting up a housing trust fund to make funds available for people to keep, you know, affordable housing and to build our communities. There are federal partners and federal programs that we need to become better at helping work with local communities, because a lot of these are focused on local communities, you know, and we need to be, and the state can provide that leadership. You know, communities need to take advantage of those programs. As governor, I'll make sure that we have the tools to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Gianforte, final 30 seconds.
Well, I think we've covered that topic. I do think that I'll share, we were talking about education as well. I'll share a story. I was in Winnett a while back, and there was a teaching pair there, husband and wife. They started to have a family, and they couldn't make it on one salary. That couple ended up moving to Wyoming. Montana lost 2 great high school teachers because we just don't pay enough to our starting teachers. That happened under Mike's watch. Wyoming starts their teachers 50% higher than Montana does. And as I talk to superintendents, we just got to get more money to the classroom.
Thank you.
Mr. Cooney, I'm asking you this question, but it could probably be asked of either candidate. Both of you have said that you would veto a sales tax bill if it comes before you, yet both of your campaigns repeatedly accuse the other of being for a sales tax. Why are we even talking about this? You think you can just tell voters anything regardless of what the truth may be?
Well, Mike, I'm telling the truth when I say that, number one, I have always opposed a statewide sales tax, and I will continue to do that. I've even put forward a program to make sure that people like Mr. Gianforte can't force a sales tax on the people of Montana. 4 times as a state legislator, I had the opportunity to vote against a sales tax. In fact, one of those bills was a bill that Mr. Gianforte championed at the Helena legislature. You know, at that time, he said it was the ideal solution for Montanans. He even looked at Montanans and said, the fairest tax is the one that you pay and I don't. That was his quote. You know, Mike, I'll always be opposed to a statewide sales tax. Mr. Gianforte is just not telling the truth. And I wish, frankly, it's talk like that that just make Montanans they just can't stand politicians like Mr. Gianforte.
Mr. Gianforte, your rebuttal.
Well, that was shameful, what you just heard. He was trying to mislead you with incorrect information. Let's look at the record. Mike Cooney has supported over $1 billion in new taxes on Montanans. In my time in office, I've delivered $2 billion in returning money to Montanans. And my plan is very clear. I've said no new taxes, no sales tax. I think Mike and I actually agree on that. When I'm your next governor, you're going to have lower property taxes and lower income taxes. And I look forward to getting to work on it.
Mr. Cooney, your response.
Greg, I think the question was about a sales tax. You supported a sales tax in the legislature. You were there as a main proponent. You also went to Congress and you voted for a bill to create a tax loophole for millionaires and billionaires just like you. What did we get in Montana? We got $2 trillion added to the federal deficit that my kids, my grandkids, and perhaps their grandkids are going to have to pay for. Honestly, Montana, we pay our bills in Montana. We don't force them off into the future. Come on, Greg, be honest.
That was
Mr. Gianforte, they're going to change topics. Both of you have touched on this a little bit, but I want to talk about school choice for a moment. Mr. Gianforte, you've been a big advocate of school choice, which means public aid or, as we know, tax credits to help kids attend private schools. If you become governor, will you be supportive of efforts to expand that type of assistance here in Montana?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Jay. 90% of Montana students go to public schools. We need strong public schools. This is why it's so concerning that we are dead last in this country in starting teacher pay. That happened on Mike's watch. And as I talk to superintendents of schools, I feel like I'm talking to small business owners. They're tied in knots with red tape. The same regulatory review we need to do in the private sector, we need to do that in K through 12 education to get more money to the classroom. That being said, I do think parents know what's best for their kids. School choice honestly does not work in rural communities because the economics don't support multiple schools. In our larger communities, however, I think parents should have say in how their kids are educated, and I'll always stand with parents.
Mr. Cooney, your rebuttal.
I have no problem with parents making the decision to take their kids and put them in a private education setting. That's the way we do it in America. But what I don't agree with is I don't agree with taking money taxpayers pay for public education and taking that money away and putting it into private education. Again, my opponent called public education a monopoly, and he has supported efforts to take public dollars and put it into private schools. We need to continue to make investments, making our education the best in the world and making sure our kids have every opportunity. That's my plan as governor.
Final word on you, Mr. Gianforte.
Sure. What Mike is missing is that his scenario disadvantages low-income families. One size doesn't fit all in education in our larger communities. And when you say you're not going to use resources to help low-income families, the dropouts in this state, 78% are from low-income families, and that condemns them to a life of potentially lower income, higher risk of ending up in jail. We need to do better for our lower income families to help them lift them up. And I think we ought to get them in an educational scenario where they can reach their greatest potential.
All right, thank you. We're going to change topics. Next question is for Mr. Cooney. We're going to talk about natural resources. Republicans, including Mr. Gianforte, have talked about developing more of our natural resources, timber mining, coal, gas. And there's companies out there that are salivating to dig under Montana's dirt and to do some harvesting there. What is your plan for extraction, and how are you going to balance that with the environment and the potential for job creation?
Sure. Well, thanks for the question, Jill. It boils down to, I have a record. I served on the state land board for 12 years, and we had to manage our state lands to not only gain the greatest benefit for our public education system, because our revenues go to the public education system, but we also have to balance it so that we can develop our natural resources. We I think, really met a great balance when it came to doing that. But let's just talk about oil, gas, and coal, number one, because that's on everybody's mind. We know we've been an energy leader in this country for the last 100 years, but the market's changing. We'll continue to go in that direction, but we need to take advantage of that great clean energy capacity that we have. We have a tremendous capacity for wind and solar and geothermal. That's where the market is heading. We can bury our head in the sand by just saying we're going to stay the course under the old market, or we can continue with the old market, moving and transitioning and creating good paying jobs in the clean energy area. That's the leadership that I'll provide. Mr.
Gianforte.
Well, I'll be very clear. I think we can develop our natural resources and protect the environment both. It's not an either or choice. And as I mentioned earlier, DEQ and DNRC have become the project prevention departments. We have projects here in the state that enjoy broad-based support that have been waiting decades for equipment. There's always one more hoop. I was out in Colstrip yesterday, and I will stand with the people of Colstrip and against Governor Inslee, who is raising money for Mike Cooney, promoting his Green New Deal. I would be disassociating from him and getting a coal port on the West Coast.
Mr. Cooney, the final 30 seconds on this topic.
Let's talk about public lands. Mr. Gianforte came to Montana from New Jersey, and the first thing he did is he sued us, the people of Montana, the owners of our public lands, to keep us from having access to the Gallatin River, because he didn't want to deal with us outside the windows of his $1 million mansion. He has a running mate who has led the charge to try to strip Montanans of our stream access law. He supports people like Mr. Pendley to lead the BLM. Let's just sell off our public lands. It's just wrong. That's not the record Montanans want.
Thank you.
Mr. Gianforte, 3 years ago, you assaulted a reporter who was asking you a question. I'm just wondering if voters should consider that when deciding whether to choose you as our next governor. Why or why not?
Well, that's been broadly covered. I don't think I can add anything here today. I will say, since that time, I've worked tirelessly for the people of Montana. I've traveled to every corner of this state. People know me, they know Susan, and they know work I've done back in Washington to represent them there. And really this race comes down to, do you want a 44-year career politician, or do you want a job creator that's going to get our economy going again? That's going to be my focus when I'm in office. And I just take some exception to what Mike Cooney, again, shamefully, he's trying to mislead you. Again, part of the reason why we need new leadership at FWP, they made a surveying error on our property. And unfortunately, it took us 18 months to get it resolved and get them to fix their error. No one was ever blocked access. That's a false narrative. I will always protect our public lands, and it's important that we expand access. And I have a very strong conservation record in Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney, your rebuttal to, I guess, the question or what he had said.
Sure. Well, let me just say that, first of all, Congressman, you did commit a crime. You violently assaulted a person who was just simply doing their job. I believe he asked you a question about health care. You disrespected law enforcement because you tried to lie your way out of it. You know, Congressman, I might just ask right now, would you look into the camera and apologize to the people of Montana for lying to the police?
Mr. Gianforte, your response.
You know, that was not my proudest moment. And I did apologize. And I've moved forward. And people have seen my record serving this great state. And some of the things I'm most proud of is the bipartisan work I did to get the first wild and scenic river designation for East Rosebud in over 40 years here in this state. I was the only Republican member of Congress during the 115th Congress that consistently voted for permanent reauthorization of LWCF. And then the Great America's Outdoors Act, which I supported and voted for, as well as the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act, which I promoted and got signed into law. I'm proud of my conservation record and the work I've done for Montana.
Thank you, Mr. Gianforte. Mr. Cooney, our next question goes to you, and it's about guns. In a previous debate, you called for red flag laws that I believe would enable authorities to take firearms away from those who, and prevent the sale of to those who pose a danger to themselves or to others. Can you expand on that? Is that something you would pursue as governor? And are there other gun control measures that you might be considering?
Well, thanks very much for the question. Let me just say that I'm a fourth generation Montanan. I support the Second Amendment. I understand how guns are a part of our culture. People love to hunt. They like to have guns for self-protection. And I will always support a person's right to and support the Second Amendment. When it comes to the red flag laws, look at the other thing Montanans do is we look out for each other. When we drive down the road in the winter, we help pull people we don't even know out of the snowbank. We shovel our neighbors' lawns or shovel their driveways. Let me just say, we also need to look out after each other when it comes to this. And that's why I support the red flag law, as so many Montanans do, as a reasonable approach to making sure that we can continue to protect our Second Amendment and protect our right to own and keep guns. That's what I'll always do. Montanans never have to worry about me doing anything to upset their ownership of guns in Montana. It's who we are, Montanans.
Mr. Gianforte, 30 seconds.
Well, let's look at the facts. I have an A rating and am endorsed by the NRA. I'm endorsed by the Montana Shooting Sports Association and other gun organizations. Mike Cooney has a D rating from the NRA. He just told you he's going to support red flag laws. I would oppose them. He stood by when local communities in Montana started universal background checks. He and Steve Bullock supported banning semi-automatic guns. This is wrong-headed, and it is our Second Amendment is very clear: shall not be infringed.
Mr. Cooney, you get the final word here.
You know, Mr. Gianforte is just not even close to being factual there. You know, number one, I'm very proud of my support that I get from the largest law enforcement union in this state. And I get that support because they trust me. Number one, they know I'm not going to lie to them, like Mr. Gianforte has lied to Montanans. You know, Mr. Gianforte is more concerned about pleasing an East Coast special interest group than he is about protecting Montanans and listening to Montanans and what they want in order to continue to maintain their right to bear and hold guns. I will always be a champion for Montanans.
All right, thank you. This next question goes to Mr. Gianforte. And again, another pivot here on the topics, but poverty continues to be a really big problem on Montana's reservations. How would you support economic development and opportunities among the state's 8 tribal nations, and how would a Republican governor serve them?
Well, I've spent time on all the reservations in the state multiple times, visiting with tribal leadership, and clearly we all know better is possible. I think it's important that we partner with tribal leadership. The last thing the tribes want is for HELENA to tell them what to do. I was very pleased recently to be up in Hayes and see the work they're doing, creating good paying jobs. I think the path forward is jobs and more opportunity. I'm very pleased to be endorsed by the Crow tribe in this election because they see an opportunity to a better future. But it's not just the reservations, it's really all of Montana. We're 44th in the nation in wages, and our kids are leaving. They're leaving with our beef and with our grain. They're our most precious export. And that's my very simple proposition to folks. We're going to create more good paying jobs. And that's going to be my top priority. We're going to get our economy going, and we're going to get our miners back to work and our loggers back to work, and we're going to create more prosperous future for Montanans.
Mr. Cooney.
You know, throughout my career in government, as well as, you know, just being lieutenant governor the last 5 years, I have so thoroughly enjoyed the relationships that I've built with our local tribes. You know, before we can even talk about what we're going to do for the tribes, we have to understand, we have to respect the tribes. We have to understand that we have a government to government relationship. We have to understand that they deserve to have a seat at the table. That's what I'm going to continue to do as governor, working closely with our tribes, working, not telling them what they should be doing, but listening to what they need and being a partner with them.
Mr. Gianforte, final 30 seconds.
Well, honestly, I agree. We need to be working with the tribes. The meth epidemic that exists across our entire state exists on the reservations as well. I'm looking forward to convening a working group to develop policy that will help us get our arms around this. Support for local law enforcement, rehabilitation for those that are addicted, because the consequences are tragic. Kids don't have moms and dads around. People end up as wards of the state in jail, and they're not able to reach their full potential.
Mr. Cooney, the next question goes to you. Let's talk about corrections. Under your administration's leadership, you embarked on a project called Justice Reinvestment to try to reduce the amount of people in prison and under state supervision. But 2.5 years into that effort, that hasn't really happened. What are you going to do as governor to fix this problem?
We're going to do what we knew we were going to probably have to do when we started this project. Honestly, we sat down, we looked at this project, we knew that it would take steps, we needed to start. And that's what we did. We took steps to begin this program, and now we can begin to fine tune it, because we know one thing. We know that there are people in our systems that perhaps don't need to be there. People who are addicted to substances, people who we need to deal with at the root cause before they get into the system. You know, corrections is one of the largest costs of our state budget. So we need to do everything we can to spend those dollars wisely. Keeping people safe in our communities, that's number one. But making sure that when we are putting people in the system, that we're doing everything to rehabilitate them and get them out so they can be productive citizens of the state. Making sure they're getting training, access to training, to the medical services that they need. That's the way we're going to succeed. And as we continue to work on this issue, those are the approaches that we need to be looking at and taking. I'll take that as governor.
Thank you. Mr. Gianforte, your
Well,
rebuttal.
on Mike's watch, we've seen a 36% increase in violent crime here in Montana. And as I said earlier, when I'm your next governor, we're going to focus more on rehabilitation of nonviolent criminals that are addicted to substances. I'd like to do that through treatment courts. We see the results. They cost a fraction of what a jail cell does, and they help people get back on their feet. But we've also got to go back upstream and look at what gets them to that point. Some of it, we need to be expanding mental health services, not shutting it down as Mike has done. And of course, a strong economy gives people hope because they have a job that they can go to and contribute.
Thank you. Mike Cooney, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Well, Congressman, you talk about mental health services and addiction services. You want to cut Medicaid. That's what you want to do. Take those services away from 90,000 Montanans. You know, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, Congressman. Please focus on the issue and be honest with the people of Montana.
Our next question goes to you, Mr. Gianforte. We've touched on this subject in previous questions, but I want to circle back on public lands access. Do you believe we have adequate access to public lands and waterways in Montana? And perhaps most importantly, if a bill comes through the state legislature and ends on your desk that would narrow that access, what would you do?
Yeah, I would veto it. What we need to do in Montana, my principles on public lands have been the same since day one. First, public lands must stay in public hands. Secondly, we should be working to increase access for sportsmen and everybody who wants to recreate and use those lands. And thirdly, we need to use the voice of the local community as the preeminent one. That's why when the community and Paradise Valley came to me and said they did not want to mine on the border of Yellowstone Park, I introduced the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act, and I saw it signed into law. Same thing was true with East Rosebud, to provide it there. My wife, Susan, and I, we've raised our 4 kids hiking, hunting, fishing, and camping on our public lands. It was 1976 when I first came here with a junior high school trip. We drove all the way from Pennsylvania. My opponent keeps saying New Jersey. I didn't grow up in New Jersey. I grew up in Pennsylvania. But we came to Red Lodge, and we spent the whole summer in the backcountry. This is part of who we are, and it needs to be protected.
Mr. Cooney, 30-second rebuttal, please.
Well, indeed, public lands are who we are in Montana, and it's why we stay here, and it's a great economic driver in our economy. Again, Congressman, you sued the people of Montana to block us from having access to the East Gallatin River. You support people like Mr. Pendley, who absolutely says selling off our public lands is what we should do. You wrote legislation as a congressman to strip protections from over 700,000 acres of public lands in Montana, opening them up. And your running mate led the charge to fight our stream access laws. You can't be a public lands champion.
Mr. Gianforte, you have the final word here.
Yeah, that's just shameful. Mike Cooney's trying to mislead you. I explained the situation earlier, but we need to move beyond this because we agree. There's no variance here. We both believe you should have access to public lands, and I'll carry those values to the governor's office, but we can protect our way of life and get the economy going. It seems Mike is more interested in his next job. I'll be focused on your job to make sure you have one and you can prosper here in the state.
All right, next question goes to Mr. Cooney. Agriculture, one of our most important industries here in Montana, of course, but it's been under a lot of stress because of the pandemic. If you're governor, do you have any specific plans to help ag weather this storm or even possibly, expand in the future?
Sure. Well, you don't have to go very far into rural Montana to understand what these trade wars, the effect these trade wars have had on our agricultural and rural communities. Number one, during these trade wars that I think were very unnecessary, I've been working and meeting with our leading trade partners throughout, Canada, Mexico, and other people around the world, letting them know that when Washington, D.C. finally gets this, gets their act together, we're going to be ready to hit the ground running. They don't have to reinvent and come in and start new relationships. We're going to be able to hit the ground running. But while we're waiting for that to happen, we need to invest in value added, making sure that Montana products that are so, very, very popular are available to people, not only in Montana, but around the country. We need to pass legislation for the, for the COOL Act, making sure that our meat, beef and pork products can be labeled in Montana. So people will buy that. They want to buy that. There's a lot we can do to help our rural economy. When rural economies are doing well, the state does well.
Thank you. Mr. Gianforte, 30 seconds, please.
Well, you're right. Ag is our #1 industry. And honestly, our ranchers and our farmers have not been getting a fair price for their commodities, in large part because of the coronavirus. I'm proud of the trade deals we did in Washington with Canada and Mexico and Japan and others, but that dog didn't get to hunt because of COVID. When I'm your next governor, we're going to focus on value added. We need to protect the Montana brand all the way through the supply chain. I was just out in Miles City, very pleased with the meat cutting apprenticeship program. We need to build beef processing capacity here in the state, and I'll do that as your next governor.
And the final word on this, Mr. Cooney.
Well, again, Congressman, you continue to support a trade policy or a lack of a trade policy that has put our rural and agricultural economy at huge risk. You don't have to talk to too many farmers and ranchers to know just what they're going through. So number one, I would suggest go back, let's get this taken care of. We can get our trade moving forward in Montana and continue to produce good Montana, quality Montana products and making sure we're getting them to the market.
Thank you both.
Mr. Gianforte, the next question is for you. You say that Montana's taxes are anti-competitive, our tax system, and that we need to cut some of those taxes. Something we hear a lot from Republican candidates. But if we cut taxes, we're going to have to cut some services in Montana. So where would you cut?
Well, Mike, I don't think that premise is actually true. Montana state revenues go up every year. And in the last 10 years alone, Montana state spending has gone up 60%. 60% in the last 10 years. So we have this steep curve of increase. So my proposal is very simple. Let's hold spending flat. As we get the economy going, that will give us a surplus. My commitment to the people of Montanans is we'll use that surplus to lower property taxes and to lower income taxes and to simplify our business equipment tax. Because at a very simple level, I think you know how to spend your money better than Helena does. And we saw this at a national level. The $2 billion that I gave back to Montanans through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act got our whole economy going. We can take a page out of that national book, implement it here. There's no reason why we have to be 44th in the nation in wages.
Thank you. Mike Cooney, your rebuttal.
Again, I think the question was what services would you cut? And let me just say that I think that during a pandemic, what services take up most of the budget in the state of Montana? It's basically health, education, and it's corrections. We've already talked about how important all three of those areas are. I don't think in the middle of a pandemic, we need to be looking at cutting education. We shouldn't be certainly cutting healthcare. You know, but my opponent is the one who came to the state legislature and said, how about a new sales tax? He wanted to put a 4% sales tax on top of the people of Montana. I'll veto that.
Thank you, Mike. The final word goes to Mr. Gianforte.
I don't know where Mike gets his facts because that's just not true. The only time I lobbied in Helena was to reduce taxes. We did that, lowering the rate from whatever it was, 11.5% down to closer to the 6.9 we have today, because I believe that everybody should have a tax break. We need to live within our means. We've seen massive growth in state spending, and that's Mike's legacy. I think we can do better, and honestly, folks, you deserve better, because Montana's not living up to its potential today.
Mr. Cooney, you get the next question, which might be the last of the debate, I've been told, but let's drill down a little more on the tax policy. You've said in the future that you would like to consider raising the state income tax rate on the wealthiest taxpayers in Montana and possibly reducing the capital gains tax credit. Why is that your position, and how would you try to get that through a Republican-controlled legislature?
Sure. Well, it's called fairness, Mike, or Jay. I mean, let's just talk about it. You know, why is it that somebody who's earning minimum wage or a little above minimum wage or even, you know, lower wages in Montana be expected to pay the same tax rate as somebody making over $500,000? You know, people, when they pay their taxes, they want their taxes to be fair. They want their taxes to be understandable. And I got to tell you, we can do a better job there. But it's certainly not fair when they see that sort of discrepancy. You know, well, as far as the capital gains is concerned, you know, that bill was originally written to make sure that, you know, true people making investments were taking advantage of it. But we're now finding that a lot of people are taking advantage that should not be getting that. You should not be getting that advantage. I'm saying let's just take a look at our tax system. And, you know, you ask about how you get this through a Republican legislature, the same way we've gotten things like Medicaid expansion through and infrastructure through. You sit down, you work with people across the party line, as I've always done. You know, talking to people in Montana still counts. I'll continue to do that as governor and make progress.
Mr. Gianforte.
Well, I think this is a very clear point of distinction between Mike Cooney and myself. If you want higher taxes, vote for Mike Cooney. If you want lower taxes and no sales tax, vote for Greg Gianforte. I've made this very clear. It's laid out in our comeback plan because I think people should be able to keep the fruits of their labor. And state government needs to live within their means. We need to bring accountability back to state government. In our business, we were in the customer service business. State agencies could take a few lessons on how to do a better job for the citizens of Montana.
Mr. Cooney, you get the last word on this question.
Sure. Congressman, I'm glad you think that you should be able to keep the fruits of your labor, and I think that's true, but when you go to Washington and vote for a bill that gives you and other millionaires a huge tax break, that's not fair. And especially when we end up with a bill of $2 trillion. $2 trillion that I won't have to pay off my kids well and their kids. You know, just have to say, Congressman, please, you know, Montanans deserve better.
Well, gentlemen, we've come to the part of our debate where each of you have a chance for a closing statement. Each candidate will get a minute 30 to give us their final thoughts today. And again, there was a drawing earlier and determined that Mr. Gianforte, you go first with your closing statement.
Okay, thank you, Jay. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Let's take a look back at 16 years of Democrat control in Helena. The record's clear. We're 44th in the nation in wages, and our kids are leaving. We're last in starter teaching pay in the entire country. That's also hurting our kids. We've got 150,000 Montanans that have lost their jobs and many businesses that have closed. And tragically, we are leading in other areas. We're second in the number of kids in foster care per capita. We're in the top 3 states countrywide in suicide. Plus, we've seen a 36% increase in violent crime in the last 7 years. Frankly, this is unacceptable, and you deserve better. That's why I'm running to be your next governor. I will maintain our way of life and create more good-paying jobs so our kids don't have to leave. It starts with our comeback plan to rebuild our economy, getting people back to work in good-paying jobs. Kristen Juris and I are ready to roll up our sleeves on day one. The highlight of this campaign has been meeting so many of you over our great state. In meeting with you, I firmly believe that our best days are ahead of us. I respectfully ask for your vote, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Mr. Cooney, you have the time now for your closing statement.
Well, thank you to MTN again. Thank you, Greg, and viewers joining us this evening. I want to speak directly to my fellow Montanans. When Governor Bullock and I were fighting to protect Medicaid expansion, I was working with members of both political parties to make sure that 1 in 10 Montanans retain their access to health care and that our rural hospitals could keep their doors open. That's how we get things done in Montana, working together. You know, together we opened up access to 250,000 more acres of public land. Together, we expanded access to quality health care to more than 90,000 Montanans. Together, we fostered an economy strong enough to help weather this pandemic. You know, and now I'm running for governor to make sure that we protect the last best place for future generations to come. Tonight, you've heard 2 very different visions for the future of Montana. You know, I've spent my career bringing Republicans and Democrats together to get the job done. You know, my opponent's missed more votes than 93% of his colleagues, and he's even profited off the pandemic. You know, I view this pandemic as a health and economic crisis. He views it as an investment opportunity. You know, I'm running to protect our public lands. He's running to block it. I'm running to make sure that we continue to fight for affordable health care. He's served in Congress trying to tear it down. I'm running to create good paying jobs. He built a business on outsourcing those jobs. Bottom line is, Greg Gianforte just can't be trusted. As your next governor, I'm going to show up every day, roll up my sleeves and get to work. With your support,
Thank you, Mr. Cooney.
we will move Montana forward.
Gentlemen, we are out of time. Good luck to both of you in this ongoing campaign and the election. And I hope you can join us next week when our focus is the U.S. Senate in Montana. Same time, same station. For Joe Valley and Mike Dennison, I'm Jay Cohn. Thanks for joining us here on the Montana Television Network.
Thank you all.
Thank you.